For those who don't know, I do a little bit of audiobook narrating, and Taylor approached me graciously and asked me to narrate first Antichrist and Apocalypse, and then I showed him I could do a bunch of accents, and we did Sword and Serpent, and it's a 15-hour audiobook. I was reading it for the first time as I was recording it. There were some moments in there. I won't give any story, but there were some moments, when a character passes away and things like that. And I was getting choked up, man. And I made sure I kept recording so it sounded organic. But I'm like, we were texting back and forth throughout the process, and I was like, no wonder actors go crazy. If you're one of those people like in those like method acting things, and you're like emoting all the stuff that the people are doing, you're gonna lose your mind. I was just doing some voices in my basement studio. Anyway, but it's an amazing book, and it goes over fictional but historically fictional.
Yeah, Sword and Serpent is a historical fiction novel about the ultimate warrior celibate, St. George, a celibate warrior who, he fights the dragon. I don't want to give away the dragon. I think the dragon is part of the best part of the book. It's at the end of the book. This is the first in a trilogy, by the way, but the dragon, the war with the dragon happens at the end of this book. And you might think you know what happens, but you don't. And it's a creative retelling of how Catholicism went from persecuted by Diocletian, and the story of St. George. George is just on the pivot, just on the turn of everything being persecuted, Catholics being martyred daily, to all of a sudden Constantine converting. So this book has Constantine and George are very close in history. They overlap. And so this book is sort of a what if they met. And then how does that relate to George and the dragon and demonic possession and all these realities that were going on in the Roman Empire. And Kennedy did a great job narrating it, because Kennedy has all these accents. So it's like it's not quite a dramatic reading, but it's like a dramatic reading. And it's really good. So Kennedy, I think you did a really good job on it.
I would say, ladies and gentlemen, even though it's a book that's written for young adults, it's like Narnia. I'm reading Narnia to my kids, and it's like my favorite thing to do is read the Narnia book. Right. And even though the stories are intense, there's no gratuitous violence. Like, even when you describe the cult of Moloch, like, obviously it's sad, but you're not doing like a Quentin Tarantino thing.
Right.
So you can play it around small children.
There's some, throughout all three books, especially as you get into the third book, when the Diocletian persecution, the martyrdom scenes are pretty gut-wrenching. It's gory, it's death, it's blood, it's gruesome, but there is just this redemptive beauty about it.
Yes.
That moves your heart. So I think that's it's redemptive suffering. So, all right, here's a sample of Kennedy reading my book, Sword and Serpent.
Are you sorry that you attacked him? What? No, Jurian cried, but he choked back bile and bowed his head again. Yes, he said, gritting the word through his teeth to keep from screaming it. Yes, I am. Oh, God. He wasn't even sure if it was just the fear or losing everything he'd counted on, but he stared with revulsion and horror at the memory of Casca's face, eyes wide with surprise, mouth agape, hands vainly trying to catch his own blood. Had he been the cause of that, he'd done it without hesitation and so much anger. How could this Marcellinus even stand to look at him, let alone show him any kindness? Can you forgive me? My forgiveness would mean nothing, Marcellinus said. But God forgives, and does not remember. He rested his hand on Jurian's head, then traced the sinew on his forehead. I absolve you of your sin, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. He clasped Jurian's shoulder. Take up the sword now and go in peace. Jurian couldn't speak, so he bent and lifted the sword. It felt surprisingly light in his hand for so ungainly a weapon. Its weight was perfectly balanced, like an extension of his arm. Is there a scabbard for it? He asked. Marcellinus glanced at Dionysius, who, with an embarrassed apology, went back to the niche where he found the sword. He brought back a strange scabbard, attached to a belt that looked like it might have fit Manus. Jurian took it tentatively and twisted it around, frowning. "I believe you'll want to wear that sword across your back," Marcellinus said, miming placing the belt over his shoulder. "It's too long to carry comfortably on your hip." That made much more sense, so Jurian wrapped the belt
All right, there it is. Good accents too. That
Thanks,
scene
dude.
there is when Jurian, he's in the catacomb, and if I remember correctly, he meets Pope Marcellinus, and he receives, well, there's this prophecy, and he receives this sword, which of course is going to play into the dragon. And also, I put this sub narrative in there of how this sword is eventually going to become a sword that's found in England many centuries later, which sort of links Constantine and George and King Arthur and all this stuff. It's pretty cool.
It's so cool.